Good evening, folks who are just arriving. Thanks for coming out tonight. We are going to be getting started soon, just waiting for more to join us, but just wanted to welcome you and say thank you for being here. We'll be getting started in a moment. In the meantime, here's the agenda for tonight. I just want to let everyone know that this meeting is being recorded. If you are not comfortable with being on camera, just simply turn your video off and then you will not be seen in the recording. But we do hope that you will join us via audio and video because we're really looking forward to your participation tonight. But I just want to let you know that this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the town's social media outlets as well as the Ashland Public Access Television. So we'll be getting started in just about 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, as a few others are starting to trickle into the meeting, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for making it tonight. My name is Alex Koppelman. I'm a regional housing planner for the Metropolitan Area Planning Council and the project manager for this housing production plan and inclusionary zoning project that we are calling Ashland for All. The agenda for tonight, we are going to start with some opening remarks from Brandy Kinsman and Stephen Greenberg. And then we're going to do a little bit of a poll with you all to see who's with us tonight and to kind of practice using the polling software that we're going to utilize to get your input on this planning process as we look at the goals for this housing production plan moving forward. Then we're going to look at some demographic data and some data about the town's housing stock and its accessibility. And then based on that, we're going to do some interactive polling to get your input on that information and then get your input on updating the goals from the housing production plan that was first completed in 2015, which we are now updating through this planning process. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Brandy.
Thanks, Alex, and happy holidays to everybody that has joined us this evening. On behalf of the Housing Production Plan Steering Committee, I want to welcome you all to the first of 2 public forums that we'll be hosting on the 2020 Housing Production Plan and Inclusionary Zoning Project. Before we get into the Housing Production Plan itself, I just wanted to provide a little bit of background and some context to this project. In 2015, the town of Ashland partnered with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, the MAPC, on its first housing production plan. MAPC collected data, did a housing needs assessment, and along with the public input, we had created some initial housing goals for Ashland. So the goal of the 2020 housing production plan is to update the plan to reflect changes in Ashland over the last 5 years and to further increase Ashland's housing diversity, affordability, and equitable opportunities for everybody. So, and with your input, we also hope to develop a townwide inclusionary zoning bylaw. This was first something that was proposed back in the 2015 housing production plan and is being implemented now. This would make all future development in Ashland have an affordability housing component, which is important. So why do a housing production plan? So it's a state certified housing production plan can lead to more grant opportunities for our town. And it is really considered a best practice. It can give us also some safe harbor from 40B developments. For folks that may not be super familiar with 40B, we hear of it frequently in regards to development projects in town. A community that hasn't met the 10% subsidized housing inventory, developers can come in with a 20 to 25% plan for affordable housing, and it can really kind of circumvent local zoning requirements. Our housing production plan is only good for 5 years, and so this is why we are doing this now. We are super fortunate to have 3 funding sources for this project. First, Ashland received a $40,000 community compact housing grant from the state. Second, Ashland received a $10,000 grant from the MAPC Technical Assistance Program. And third, the Ashland Affordable Housing Trust approved $15,000 for a total of $65,000 for this project. As Ashland residents, housing really affects all of us. We most definitely really want your input on this project. We want to increase community awareness of housing issues and activities. In addition to the 2 public forums, MAPC will also be hosting some focus groups to gather more information from the public as well. The Housing Production Plan Steering Committee itself has some representation from multiple boards and committees here in Ashland. Many of my fellow committee members are here tonight, and I'd love to introduce them. We have Tricia Kendall from the Planning Board, Ron Eskovitz from the Board of Health, Aaron Ladd from the CPC, Steve Greenberg from the Affordable Housing Trust, and David Rosenblum from the Affordable Housing Trust as well. This is staffed in Town Hall by our planning department, Peter Matchek, our town planner, and Emma Snellings, our assistant town planner. As I mentioned, our goal is really to get to that 10% state mandated affordable housing inventory, subsidized housing inventory. When we began this process in 2015, Ashland was at 3.66% with 241 units. Currently, we are at 6.31% with 415 units. We still have a way to go, but we are making steady progress. And really, the town of Ashland is committed to affordable housing. So I'm going to turn it over now to Steve Greenberg from the Affordable Housing Trust to give some highlights of the progress of Ashland's affordability. Steve?
Thank you, Brandy. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, and hopefully we're going to get a lot accomplished. But I just wanted to let everyone know, if you don't already know, the mission statement of the Ashland Affordable Housing Trust is to create and preserve affordable housing. I oftentimes wish the term was workforce housing rather than affordable, but it is what it is right now. And our goal, again, is to create and preserve. And this HPP steering committee is charged with creating a new plan that will help not only the Affordable Trust, but the town of Ashland achieve that 10% goal, which is mandated by the state in terms of percentage of housing stock in town that is deemed and deeded as affordable. The trust has made some, has had some pretty good activity recently. We put 5 different affordable deed restricted units on the market about 6-7 weeks ago. As of today, 3 out of the 5 have closed, and we hope to close the other 2 by the middle of January, maybe one on Thursday, and we'll have one more that will stretch into the middle of January. But that's That's 5 units that are going to deserved families. It's going to bring some new folks into town, and I think it's great for the community, great for affordable housing, and we're excited to have some new folks moving into town. There's been some other projects. Many folks might be familiar with Legacy at Robert Hill Way, up off of Oak Street and Independence Lane. That should be opening soon, and that project has some, I would say, aggressive, affordable goals in terms of meeting the needs of not only folks that might meet that 80% median income, but lower median income, folks that are maybe elderly, and others who might qualify in the 40–50% range of area median income. But other projects include a development on Pond Street where the Ashland Affordable Trust is contributing $50,000 for 4 units. That's 50,000 times 4 for 4 units at that project, the former Marconi's, to be developed and deed restricted as affordable rentals. And the rental rate will be determined at a very fair and equitable with the developer in terms of what folks will have to pay for their monthly rate. And I think one of the things that the trust is very proud of is contributing up to $250,000 towards the rental assistance program and some deed restricted mortgage assistance program, since many folks are out of work and can't afford to pay their rent or their deed restricted mortgage. With the help of Emma Snelling and the planning department, it's remarkable what those folks have helped accomplish here in town. And I'm probably running over my time, but again, thank you for being here, and excited about getting something accomplished. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Brandy and Steve. I now want to introduce my colleague Yolando Spinola, who works on our community engagement team at MAPC. He's going to teach us how to do some interactive polls that we're going to be using tonight and lead us through those. So Yolando, take it away.
Great, thanks, Alex. So I would love if you all can click the link in the chats if you are on your computer. I'm posting a link that you can open on a different browser on your computer, or you can open up a browser on your computer. It could be Chrome or Safari, and then you would paste in that link that I posted in the chat. This will allow us to connect with you all via a polling software called PollEV, and you can participate in this poll either on your phone using one of those browsers, or opening it up on your computer browser. And once you're there, we'll be able to start to participate in some demographic polls that we have. Basically, you just have to enter your name, and then you'll click continue, and then you'll see our first poll pop up in a second. Okay, so our first poll is, do you live in Ashland? And you should see that option either on your phone or in that browser window that you have open on your computer. And if you do not, just again, click the link in the chat, or go to pollev.com/MAPC poll on your phone or computer. Looks like the majority of y'all said yes, so we'll move on to the next question. Thank you. So the next question is living in Ashland. If you live in Ashland and you said yes, how long have you lived in Ashland? So, and you could just click NA if you said no. Okay, great. And we'll move on to the next question.
It's 101%.
From the options below, which age group do you fall under? Just want to get a sense of who's at this meeting today, who were we able to outreach to and connect with and is attending, and who maybe is not here. Just this is just good for us to know. Great, thanks. A few more results coming in. Okay, and the next question is, how do you identify yourself? For those who are joining us, I see one more person just joined us from the waiting room. I'm posting a link in the chat that you should be able to open up on your phone or in a separate browser in your computer to participate in some polling questions that we have up right now in regards to demographics. All right. And we can move on to the next question, Alex. And do you rent or own your home?
We rent or own. We rent, we own, we both.
Okay, we'll give it a couple more. Oh, there we go. Next question. What type of home do you live in? I see a few more people just joined us from the waiting room. For those who are just joining us now, we're participating in a demographic poll. There's a link to the poll in the chat, and I'm gonna repost that link in the chat multiple times over for anybody who's new to the Zoom experience in order for you to participate in this demographic poll. Great. Alex, we can move on to the next one. So the next poll that we have up is, do you live in a deed restricted affordable housing unit? So
This is a housing unit that's required to cost no more than 30% of your income through a deed restriction.
thank you, Alex. And for those who just joined us, click the link in the chat in order to answer this question along with some other demographic questions. Do you work in Ashland? About 50-50. All right, 10 more seconds. Okay, next question here. What is your annual household income? Okay. And great. And we'll move on to the next question. Actually, that was our last question. So thank you all for participating in those demographic questions. We'll have some more polls along further along in the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Yolando, for leading us through that. And I'm glad that everyone seems to be able to figure that out. If you are having any issues, though, please let Yolando know in the chat and he can assist you. And I would suggest leaving the browser open because we are going to be using Poll Everywhere throughout this presentation. But now I'm going to move into the next portion of our meeting, which is the housing needs assessment. This is the technical work that MAPC has done to give the town an idea of where its demographics stand, how that relates to its housing stock, and how accessible the housing stock is. So we're going to go through various sections of this, and as we do it, we're going to get your feedback to see what you think is interesting about this data. And then when we're done, we're going to use this information to think about our different polls that we're our goals that we're looking at. So before I get into that, though, I just want to let you know a little bit more about MAPC and housing production plans. So MAPC is the regional planning agency for Greater Boston, so kind of like everything in 495 shown on this map. And then the blue communities on the map are those communities that MAPC has assisted with a housing production plan. You may notice that Ashland is on this map because, as Brandy mentioned, we worked on the town's original housing production plan in 2015, and now we're helping update that. So what is in a housing production plan? Well, the first is a lot of data, because we want to make data-driven decisions. And the purpose of a housing production plan is to actually direct the amount and type of housing that you'd like, and think proactively about it, rather than having to react to a 40B development or something like that. So we're able to do that by having a lot of data. But this is also a public-driven process, so we need to hear from you about our findings, and we need your help tonight to think about the goals of this plan. We have the advantage of having goals that were already established in 2015. So tonight we're going to be able to look at those goals and then assess how relevant they are today. Yolanda is going to paste those goals in the chat. So if you want to start looking at them as I'm presenting to kind of get a heads up on the game, that would be great. But after we reach goals for the plan update, then we'll be thinking about strategies, and then we'll be thinking about places that are good for different housing development, places that are conducive to health, places that give people more opportunities, access to transportation, those sorts of things. Now, in the last housing production plan, one of the strategies that was in that plan was to develop an inclusionary zoning bylaw. So now in this plan, we're actually going to implement that recommendation by working on developing an inclusionary zoning bylaw, which I'm going to discuss more in a minute. But just to let you know how this process is going, I'm really glad that you're here tonight to kick this process off, but this is going to be roughly a 10-month process, and there's going to be many opportunities for the public to participate. The plan is being stewarded by an advisory committee, which Brandy introduced at the top of the meeting, and then the town and MAPC staff are doing the technical work, but really you as the public are key to making this a successful plan by giving us your insight and your input to decide what you'd like to see for your community. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about inclusionary zoning. As a part of this plan update, we're going to be implementing a recommendation from the last plan, which is to draft an inclusionary zoning bylaw. So essentially what an inclusionary zoning bylaw is it's a requirement that when there's a new housing development, a certain percent of the units in that development have to be deed restricted affordable, meaning they're required to be affordable. And this is a way for the town to leverage private investment to create affordable housing at next to no cost for the town. But this is a process that has to be this is a policy that has to be carefully crafted to make sure that we're not making it too difficult to build housing by increasing costs, because inclusionary zoning is kind of a balancing act. So let's look at this. If you are a market rate housing developer, you're developing housing, it's a business, okay? So when you have a business, that you have to think about costs and revenue. So I've created a very basic example for us to think about some of the trade-offs that we need to think about when we're doing inclusionary zoning. So let's say I'm a developer and I know there's this site, and I know that I can build 10 market rate housing units on it. Great, so that's going to produce revenue for my business. But I have all these other costs. I have to pay for the land for the site. I have to pay for the construction on the site. And then there are other land use regulations like parking requirements that I'm required to build, and those are actually very costly. So these are all adding to my costs. But now with inclusionary zoning, the community would also be saying, you need to build deed restricted affordable units. So that increases the costs further. And what we need to be careful about is we don't want to draft a policy that is going to make it so costly that somebody says, you know what, I'm going to take my business elsewhere, because we want to see more housing in Ashland. We want to see different kinds of housing in Ashland. We want housing to be accessible to people at different life stages and income levels. So this is what we need to be careful about. But what if we said, okay, so normally you can build 2 stories, allowing you to get 10 market rate units. What if we said you can build 1 more story and you could get 5 more market rate units? All of a sudden, the costs and the revenue start to balance out a little bit. And then what if we said, you know what, your development's close to the commuter rail. So maybe all of these parking requirements can be looked at, and maybe we reduce the parking requirements a little bit. Okay, so we reduce them a little bit. Maybe that allows you to build another affordable unit. So these are the kinds of things that we want to think about when we're crafting an inclusionary zoning policy. But before we do that, we need to think about the data. We need to think about demographics in Ashland now and in the future, and how the existing housing stock is playing out. So this is something that we're going to be working on over, the next 10 months or so. We're going to gather a lot of input from the public as well as the development community, and we're going to be thinking about the data that we have to carefully craft this policy to make sure that we have a pretty balanced scale. So I know that might have raised several questions for you. So in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you to put any questions that you have in the chat. But after registering for this event, we have your email. So please stay tuned for more information on inclusionary zoning to continue to help you understand how it works, and for updates as we are working on that policy while we're working on this plan update. So with that, I am going to see if there's any quick questions in the chat that I might be able to get to now. Doesn't look like anything's coming in, but if you do have some, please type them in the chat, because we're going to review those and make sure that your questions are answered. All right, so with that, I'm going to get into the meat of the housing needs assessment presentation. There are 3 elements of this presentation. We're looking at demographics, the housing stock, and then how accessible the housing is. So is it affordable? Can people access that housing? First, just looking at basic population numbers, we see that the population of Ashland is growing, and projections show that this should continue. The projections from the last plan may have shown that Ashland would have maybe a few hundred more residents today than the actual numbers show. So the projections have been a little bit high, but we do know just from the basic trend line of these actual numbers that the population is growing. Now let's look at which segments of the population are growing. This chart is showing age increases in different age groups from 2010 to 2018, which is our latest data set that we have available from the census. So we can see that the biggest areas of growth, sorry about that, the biggest areas of growth are in the 35 to 39 demographic, and the demographic that represents children. So we can see that there's growth in families, and then we can also see that the population is aging, which is pretty common for most communities around the Commonwealth. Now, if we look at the distribution of residents today by age, we can see that the largest group is the 35 to 54 age group, which usually is indicative of families. But we can also see that this pyramid is pretty proportional from the top to the bottom. So there's a pretty even distribution of age groups outside of the largest age group there. Now let's look at Ashland households over time. This is also increasing, which is consistent with the increases we've seen in Ashland's population. And essentially what this tells us is the town is going to need more housing of all different types to meet these demographic changes. Let's look at household size. This is the average household size, and you'll notice there's some other communities on this chart that we're using to just give us a little bit of context to see where Ashland stands. And Ashland falls in the middle of the pack here with an average household size of 2.6, which is pretty similar to other communities as well as the state and the county. Now let's look at Ashland households by age and by tenure, meaning who's owning and who's renting in the town. From this chart, what really stands out to me is that there are clearly more owners in the town than renters, but there are large chunks of renters that fall across all different age groups. So when we're talking about renters, it's not just young folks, not just older folks, it's everybody. Everybody rents. And that's something that we need to think about, but also overall, we see that there are fewer renters than owners in the town. Now let's look at race and ethnicity in the town, and we also have our context communities here for reference. 78% of the town is white, and then 22% is non-white. And then what does that population look like? The biggest demographic group aside from white is Asian, and then next would be African American and Hispanic or Latino. All right, and now looking at school enrollment. So this is something that we want to monitor when we're thinking about demographic changes in the housing stock. And as we can see, enrollment in Ashland schools has increased over time. This is showing public school enrollment, which is something we want to think about when we're doing a public plan around housing. I wouldn't say these are dramatic increases, but it is something to think about as the town continues to grow and thinks about adding to its housing stock. Okay, this next chart is showing median income in Ashland for family households, which are here in, oh, sorry about that, which are here in the light blue, and then the non-family households in the darker shade of blue. So as you can see, the median income for family households is quite high, but for non-family households, it's quite low. This is consistent with our other context communities, the state and the county. But this is something to think about when we think about the overall median income in town. We need to keep in mind that it can be very different depending on the household type. Let's look a little further at the income distribution in town, looking at 2013 and 2018. So as we can see, the number of residents making over 100,000 has increased, which is positive. We would like to see income go up, of course. But at the same time, the residents who are making less than 40,000 has also increased. So again, this points to the fact that we need to think about specific segments of the population when we're thinking about income, housing, and housing accessibility. All right, so I know that was a lot of information. Right now, we're going to ask you to go ahead and pull up Poll Everywhere again, and go ahead and let us know what you found to be interesting or maybe surprising about the data. So this poll, you'll actually be able to just type your responses in. And Yolanda, I believe they can actually look at other people's responses and vote if they agree with those responses as well. Is that right?
That is correct, yes. So you should be able to upvote or even downvote different ideas that you see in front of you. And for anybody who is new, I see a few people did join the call a little later. To participate in this poll and other polls, just click the link in the chat in order to open up a new window to answer this question.
Okay, and so as I mentioned, if there's something on here that you agree with, you can vote that you agree with that one, and then we'll see that reflected here on the side. All right, so we'll give you about 2 more minutes to weigh in on the demographic section, and then we'll move on to housing stock. So it looks like our top results so far about what was surprising about this data, school population not growing dramatically. Another that received many votes was lack of student enrollment growth versus increased growth of housing units in town. Then from there, someone found it surprising that only 3% of Black residents are in town today, and there's 3 votes for that as well. And then many more results. So thank you for putting this in. And this is a good time to remind you that your input is going to be vital to this plan. We're going to include it in the plan. It's going to help us formulate goals and formulate inclusionary zoning policy. So thank you for your participation. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next section. So now that we've looked at this demographic data, let's look and see how it aligns or maybe doesn't quite align with the demographics, demographic changes that we're seeing. So this chart shows the percent of single family versus multifamily housing units, single family units being 1 unit structures, and then multifamily here being aggregated as anything more than a 1 unit structure. Could be a duplex, could be small multifamily building, what have you. So not uncommon with other communities in the region. The majority of the housing stock is single family, 79%. I will mention that this has actually increased by 3% since the time of the last housing production plan when it was 76. I should also note that our latest data from the census goes to 2018, and there has been a lot of new development in town, like the Sears development and others that isn't reflected in this data, but we should also keep in mind the town is making some progress with seeing new development in the downtown and surrounding areas. So let's look at this a little bit closer. There are, roughly 6,900 housing units in town. And as we just looked at, the majority of them are single family. But it's interesting when we break this out a little bit. Close to 58% are detached single family homes. And then 20% of those are attached homes, which could be townhomes. Sometimes other types of housing can fall into that category. And then from there, we can see that, there's a pretty even distribution of other types of homes, but the clear majority are single unit housing. Here are the duplexes. Here's the amount of 3 to 4 unit buildings, 5 to 9 unit buildings, 10 to 19, and then over 20. So again, this gives you a sense of the housing stock, and really the large trend that stands out is that the majority of the stock is single units. So let's look at how many owners and renters are in town. So it's pretty clear that the majority of housing units in town are owner occupied, as we were looking at earlier. And I want to make a note that this is there's been very little change in this since the last housing production plan, where the percent of owners is still much higher than the percent of renters. But not just thinking about percents, thinking about actual households, there still is a good amount of renters when you just think about it. 1,200, about 1,200 renters in town. So we still want to be thinking about those folks. Here is the renters and owners across different years where housing was built. So going all the way back to before 1940 to today, we can see that there's been a lot more owner-occupied housing built over time, but there has been some good progress made on this front in 2010 or later. And again, the newest developments aren't reflected in the census data, so we should keep that in mind as well. The other thing that I think we need to be aware of here is that there's a large chunk of the housing stock that was built before 1960. Those buildings may need some upkeep. If the population is aging, folks may have a little difficulty keeping up their home as they move on to different life stages, maybe transition to a fixed income. So that's another thing to think about. All right, so that's our housing stock section. So we want to hear from you again, what you found to be particularly interesting about this data. So we will give you the next few minutes here to weigh in.
Of you could sleep with me, now
Alex, there was also some questions in the chat. Just wanted to flag that for you.
Sure, let me take this opportunity to see if I can answer any questions.
There was one question from Mark. How did you arrive on to the diversity data? And there was another question about cost of living data.
Yeah, so the demographic data pertaining to race and ethnicity comes from the U.S. Census Bureau American Community Survey, which is done every year. It is based on sample data, so there is a small margin of error, but it definitely gives you a good sense of things. So that comes from the census. And then what was the other question, Yolanda?
Does employment hold to the to latest cost of living data?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that question's pertaining to.
Mark, feel free to elaborate in the chat on to clarify more with regards to that question.
I'm while Mark is clarifying, I'm just going to try and answer some of these other ones. We have another one from Michael, which I believe is about inclusionary zoning. Does the cost of development outweighing revenue mean the developer is going to take their business elsewhere, or does it mean they're just going to build denser development to make up the costs? So, yeah, I think you're raising a good point, Michael, just about the trade-offs in designing a policy like that. One of the trade-offs may be that the town may decide it's appropriate to allow a little more density in an area to allow that developer to make up the costs. To try and ensure that they don't take their business elsewhere. And there are other trade-offs that you can think about as well. Sometimes an expedited permitting process, waiving permitting fees, reducing parking requirements, which reduces a lot of costs. Those are other ways to do that. So that's a good question. Thank you. Let's see if I can answer maybe like one or two more before we move forward here. Question from Kathy Rooney: describe workforce housing. What's the difference between that and affordable? So, workforce housing, I think, is typically defined as, about 100 to 120% AMI, area median income, meaning that it's housing that's deed restricted, so it's required to be affordable, but it's aimed towards more middle income folks who may be particularly important to the workforce, who just can't afford housing in the marketplace. Then housing that's at lower AMIs may be looking at folks with like 80% area median income, and then even down to like 30% area median income, which is considered extremely low income folks, who I would say are also important to the workforce. but that's just kind of how that's typically thought about. We're going to look at that in more detail when we get into the next section on housing affordability. So I know there are still some more questions coming in. In the interest of time, I'm going to go to our next section. So now that we have looked at the demographics in town as well as the housing stock, let's look at housing affordability. And as we're getting into this discussion, it's important to define what affordable is. So typically we define affordable in the housing field as housing that costs no more than 30% of your income, so that you have enough income to pay for the other things you need, like food, transportation, healthcare, all these other costs that you are incurring. So if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing, that's considered cost burdened. You're spending too much. It's making it more difficult for you to afford other things. If you're spending more than half of your income on housing, that's considered severely cost burdened, which is making it very difficult for you to afford these other necessities. And I might add that if you are cost burdened, it means you have less discretionary income that you can use to support local businesses and the economy. So there's also a relationship between housing costs and the local economy. So with that, let's look at median rent in town. This data is based on MAPC's rental database, which pulls online rental listings to give an idea of what the rent looks like in the marketplace. And we're seeing that the median rent is about $2,000. If we look at our local MLS data that Steve provided us with, we know that overall the median rent is about $2,100. And then MAPC's data is showing a little bit of difference, well, actually pretty large difference between the median rent for a 1-bedroom and a 2-bedroom. But I think we need to think about it overall, because rental data can sometimes be difficult to trust because it changes so often. Sometimes there's not a large sample size, so you're not always getting a very accurate picture. So I would say we need to think about this about median rent about $2,000 in town. Now let's look at for sale housing. And here we're looking at the median cost of a single family home in the darker shade of green, and the median cost of a condo in the lighter shade of green in Ashland and in our context communities. So as you can see, the cost to buy a home in town is quite high for both single family and condominiums, which we hope would be a more accessible type of owner occupied housing. So if you're not able to get down payment assistance, if you don't want to pay PMI and you're going to be putting 20% down, I mean, you have to have over $100,000 to get into town. So this is something to think about, because it's a big barrier for people to be able to live in town. And considering that the majority of the town's housing stock is owner occupied, that means that it may be difficult for folks who would like to come here, or folks who maybe are already here but want to buy a home, maybe people who want to buy their first home, seniors who want to downsize, maybe you have kids who'd like to move back and it's going to be difficult for them to do it. So this is something to think about when we look at the high cost of for sale housing in town. Let's look at those costs over time and see that it's really increased pretty heavily over time, both the single families, but then particularly the condos, which at the time of the last housing production plan was 275,000, and now is at 400,000. That's a 45% increase in just 4 years. So the housing market is definitely hot. So let's look at this again, cost burden. I actually mentioned this earlier, so I won't go over it again, but you don't want to be spending more than 30% of your income on housing, and you especially don't want to be spending more than half, because you need to be able to afford these other things. So now let's look at some cost burden data. In town, roughly 1,700 households are cost burden, which represents more than a quarter of households in town who are experiencing cost burdens. And this is something that disproportionately affects renters. As you can see, 43% of renters are cost burdened, and then close to 20% are severely cost burdened. But it's not just limited to renters. Also, almost a quarter of owners in town are cost burdened as well. So this is an issue for both owners and renters. Let's look at cost burden by age. I think it's pretty clear here that since the population, the majority of the population is in this age group, you see larger numbers here of folks who are cost burdened. But when you look at the percentages, you're seeing close to equal levels across all age groups. So again, this is something that isn't just affecting one particular age group, but it's affecting people across all age groups in town. Now let's look at cost burden by income level, because this is where cost burden can really be a big problem. You can be cost burdened and wealthy if your house just costs a lot of money, but it may not impact you that much. Where it does impact households is when they already have less discretionary income and they're using a large amount of it for their housing. We're talking a little bit about income levels and area median income. So here's your classification here. 100% of the area median income, higher income, moderate income, low income, and usually qualifying for deed restricted affordable housing is 80 to 50% here. And then there are these groups below that, the extremely low income group making 30% of the area median income. So when we think about that, there are a large amount of folks in these lower income groups who are cost burdened, and actually many of those in the extremely low income group are severely cost burdened. And overall, there are close to 1,100 households that are low income and cost burdened. So these are the folks that we want to be thinking about. These are the folks that are going to be particularly vulnerable to changes and impacts like the impact of the pandemic. And so this is the groups that we want to be thinking about in this plan, and as we're crafting an inclusionary zoning policy that can target different income levels. And looking at income by housing household type, we're seeing that elderly households are the households that are really seeing the most amounts of lower income. The darkest shade here are the extremely low income households, and you can see majority fall in the elderly household type. But then the other group that stands out as well is single person households or non-related households. So that probably is pertaining to people who are living with roommates. So that's what stands out to me in terms of who has lower income are the elderly households and those who are living alone. But then a particularly vulnerable group are seniors who are living alone. There are 835 seniors who are living alone. And when we look at that group, we can see that more than half of them are very low income, and more than 70% of them are low income, meaning that they are eligible to live in deed restricted affordable housing, which inclusionary zoning would help us create. So we've been talking about the area median income. That is how HUD determines eligibility for deed restricted affordable housing, which again is required by deed restriction to be affordable to you, meaning costs no more than 30% of your income. This figure varies by household size, which as you can see here, for a two-person household, 77,000, and you'd be eligible for deed restricted housings. So some folks find it surprising that you can make this kind of income and still be eligible. So let's look at how many households in town are eligible for deed restricted affordable housing. Over 1,800 of the households in town, which represent about 30% of households in town, are eligible to live in deed restricted affordable housing. And more than half of them are extremely low income or very low income. So that means that not only do we need more affordable housing in town, but we need housing that's affordable to deeper levels that are going to be able to help these folks that we're talking about here. Well, let's look at this in terms of the town's subsidized housing inventory. So the latest numbers that we have from DHCD put the town at 6.2% in terms of its subsidized housing inventory. Now this figure is the total amount of housing units is the denominator. So all housing units in town. And then the numerator are those that are eligible to be on the subsidized housing inventory. Many are built through 40B or come in other ways. So this figure's up 3% since the time of the last housing production plan. I think we should applaud the town's efforts on this front in terms of making significant progress here towards that 10% that Brandy mentioned at the top of the meeting. But what I, as a housing planner, often remind folks is that even if you are at the 10%, usually it's not lining up with the need, with those who are eligible for housing. So as we saw, there's roughly 1,800 households that are eligible for deed restricted affordable housing. And for those households, there are 410 units on the town's subsidized housing inventory. So when you break that down, for every 5 income eligible households, there's 1 unit on the town's SHI. All right, that concludes our housing affordability section. That was, I think, our media section. So take a few moments to think about it and weigh in here on this. And then after that, we're going to be moving on to a discussion about goals, which I'm excited for us to have, especially working our way through all this information. So what surprised you about the housing affordability data? What do you think is important? While folks are thinking about that, I'll see if there are some questions that I may be able to get to in the chat. Mark has a question about the high cost for single family homes, and he wants to know, is it because of a lack of business growth? You know, I think it's great that you're making a connection there between housing and the economy. There could be several reasons for the increased costs. I'll say one of them is a very high cost of land. But yeah, there's definitely a relationship there in terms of revenue and then taxes that come from businesses versus taxes that come from homes. So good insights there. Is there any data regarding the tax revenue generated for the town by owners versus revenue generated by renters in multifamily housing? That comes from Ron. Thank you, Ron. I think that's some information that we could probably work with the town to get. So thank you for letting us know. We will look into that. Susan's drawing attention to the 45% increase in housing costs in the last 2 years. I'll say that that's specifically for the cost of condominiums. Does having access to the commuter rail raise the prices and demand? I think it could. You know, housing that is close to amenities can be pricier. What age groups does this chart represent that are heavily cost burdened? So we actually looked at that, and we were seeing cost burden across all age groups in the town. We had them aggregated into 3 different groups, and we were seeing pretty similar levels of cost burden across all age groups. But there's a lot of cost burden for single person senior households. Okay. Susan wants to know how many single family elderly homes there are We might be able to triangulate that data. So thank you for drawing that point there. We'll look into that. So we have a kind of a comment coming in from Cliff about the importance of seniors wanting to be able to remain in their home and stay in town, which I think is something for us to think about as we're thinking about goals for this plan update. And we're actually going to go ahead and move into that section now. So I'm going to ask Yolando to paste the goals in the chat again. So these are the goals that were developed as a part of the 2015 housing production plan. And what we want to do now is look at those goals and based on the information that we've been studying tonight, think, are these goals still relevant today? Are these goals the same ones that we want to move forward with? Or maybe do we want to adjust them a little bit? Maybe some aren't as relevant. Maybe there's some that aren't represented here that we want to think about adding as a part of this process. So the goals from the last plan, the first was to preserve and advance housing affordability in town. The second, maintain high quality of life through smart housing planning and production. So kind of making sure that housing is helping people live healthy lifestyles by being strategic about where it goes. So that's kind of what that goal is referring to. Goal 3, encourage affordability through town and target affordable housing production to designated sites. So, thinking proactively and strategically about what type of housing is best where. Building community awareness around housing issues and activities. So, kind of what we're doing tonight a little bit, looking at some of this information, making people aware of the groups in town that have housing needs. Goal 5, address unmet housing need through programming. So, thinking about housing programs, I'll give you an example. First-time homebuyers program helps people who haven't bought their first home, down payment assistance, education around the buying process would be an example of a housing program. Goal 6, adopt zoning changes to promote development of affordable housing, diverse housing typologies. So I think that kind of pertains to the inclusionary zoning bylaw that we're working on now. Would be an example of a zoning change, but there are other things like encouraging mixed use, maybe allowing a little more density in areas where that's appropriate. Those are some things that fall into that category. And then goal 7, promote healthy housing. So again, just thinking about how can housing be situated to produce a more healthy lifestyle? Like how do we combine housing with green space and make the town more walkable? That sort of thing. So these are the 7 goals, and we're going to spend the next 15 minutes going through each one and thinking about how relevant they are today. But before we go into each specific goal, let's just look at this generally. So generally, do you think these goals are still relevant? Are they extremely relevant, very relevant? Yes, they're relevant, or no, you don't think they're relevant anymore. So just overall, do you think these goals are still matching up with the need in town? All right. Looks like most folks have responded to this one, and the majority thinks the goals overall are relevant, very relevant, or extremely relevant, but there's still some folks that think they're maybe not quite as relevant. Let's go ahead and take a look at each specific goal, and maybe that'll give us a little more ability to think about things in regards to particular needs. So let's look at the first goal: work to preserve and advance housing affordability in town. Go ahead and rank this one in terms of importance. while you're doing that, I'm going to try and get to some of the questions here in the chat. Catherine Rooney wants to know how I would describe workforce housing. Usually workforce housing pertains to deed restricted housing that's meant for middle income folks who are critical to the workforce. Maybe housing for teachers, maybe it's housing for people who work in restaurants, maybe it's housing for nurses. That's what I think of when I think of workforce housing. But I think it's also just important to note that the terms that we use go a long way with how housing is perceived, and that's why that term is used sometimes. So it looks like folks think the first goal is extremely important, or very important, the majority anyway. So we're going to go ahead and go to the next goal. Goal 2, maintain high quality of life through smart housing planning and production. Go ahead and rank this one in terms of importance today. I'm going to continue to answer questions. What does the build out look like for Ashland? So Stephen Mitchell has asked that. That is something that we're going to be looking at as we move through the process. There's going to be a suitability analysis that looks at things geographically throughout the town and looks at some potential for where housing could go and potential to get affordable housing through inclusionary zoning. So that's something that I think we're going to be looking at more closely as we move on. All right. And then for goal 2 here, less folks find this one very important or extremely important, but still the majority feel like this one is important. Now going to goal 3, encourage affordability throughout town and target affordable housing production to designated sites. Go ahead and rank this one. Have another question from Catherine. She has asked, can you build affordable housing and workforce housing so that green infrastructure is not compromised? Can these affordable workforce units be required to be green and to keep up with green technology? I think that's a great question. The intersection between housing and clean energy and our health is a very real one. And there are strategies that we can look at to ensure that that is happening. I will say it is challenging though, because there are costs associated with building affordable housing, and there's costs associated with building housing that's energy efficient, that has green components like solar panels and things. But it's something that we could look closely at when we're thinking about our goals and strategies. So goal 3, I think pretty notably is being ranked lower in importance today. So this is something that we may want to take a closer look at as we're updating the goals. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next one. It's goal 4. Build community awareness of housing issues and activity. Go ahead and weigh in on this one. All right, goal 4, looks like the majority of folks find this one to be important, very important, or extremely important. Pretty good importance for this one. Let's go to goal 5. Address unmet housing needs through programming. So again, like example of that would be a first-time homebuyers program, maybe a rental assistance program that Steve mentioned earlier. Those examples of programs. So go ahead and rank this goal in terms of importance. Michael has asked, is there a link between targeting housing to designated sites and the maintenance of green infrastructure? I would say certainly so. And sometimes I think, as we're pointing out early based on Catherine's comments, this is something that you can think about strategically. There's a little bit of a challenge, I think, with cost, but sometimes you can leverage private investment to maybe maintenance some of that green infrastructure. So I think that's definitely something that we should be thinking about moving forward. Goal 5, it looks like this one is not considered quite as important as some of the other goals were, but it's still a majority are finding it at least important today. So we have 2 more goals. Goal 6 is to adopt zoning changes to promote development of affordable housing, diverse housing types. Go ahead and rank that one. So question has come in from Brandy. Given the importance of affordable housing in Chapter 40B, how's the state supporting affordable housing for towns? I think that's a great point, that there is a state goal of getting more affordable housing. So, the state needs to be helping communities do that. I think just doing a housing production plan can give the town access to some of that state funding that can be helpful. And then there are other funding streams from the state and programs that could be leveraged from the state. So certainly something we could think about when we start thinking about strategies for the plan. All right, so we have a ranking in for goal 6. It looks like it's ranked pretty high in importance. We're going to go to the last goal. Goal 7, promote healthy housing. Go ahead and weigh in on this last goal. Mark's made a comment in the chat about the importance of mixed use in Ashland. Thank you, Mark. Deborah said she's a little confused by goal 6. Again, that's thinking about changing the land use regulations, which determine what kind of housing and development is allowed different places to encourage more affordable housing. And that also could pertain to our implementation of inclusionary zoning, using the zoning regulations to get more affordable housing. All right. Okay, so we've gone through each of the goals from 2015. Now let's spend the last time here together to really think about something important, which is what goals need to be added in 2020. So based on those goals, what's missing? What do we need to be thinking about now? Given all these different changes. I've heard a lot of talk about the intersection between housing and green infrastructure. I'd also point out that, we're seeing huge economic impacts from the pandemic. So, there's been quite a bit of changes that reflected in the demographic data and that we've gone over. So based on all the work that we've done tonight, what do you think we need to add as a part of this housing production update? See a comment that's come in from Michael about providing some more context for the goals. Certainly that's something that we could spend a little more time on. And I just want to point out that we're going to make the polls that you're using tonight available online. And when we do that, we can certainly provide more information around those goals. Of course, there is the actual 2015 housing production plan that talks about these goals in detail, which is another way to gain some more understanding on those goals. All right, so we've got some ideas coming in. Go ahead and put your thinking caps on, and let's come up with some new goals for 2020 here. And again, if you like something that somebody said, you can upvote that and click on that to elevate that higher. So we're going to spend. We got just about 4 minutes left in our meeting tonight. So let's finish strong, come up with some ideas for new goals. So it looks like our top goal right now pertains to environmental sustainability. That's received 7 votes. After that, focus on development on the revitalization of existing properties as opposed to the conversion of open space to housing. Okay, so thinking about rehab and infill. That has 5 votes. And then also with 5 votes, the ability to make smaller housing on lots that are affordable. Okay, so thinking about that, those smaller housing types, creating more housing options that way. Next after that is a goal around diversity and inclusion. Definitely, I think that relates to some of the information we're talking about tonight. And we have some more rolling in. So I'm going to give you all just the next 2 minutes or so to finish up any thoughts that you have, or maybe spend some time reading what others have wrote to see if you agree, and then we'll close for the night. All right, as folks are finishing up their thoughts, I just want to remind everyone that there will continue to be opportunities to offer up your input on this plan as we move forward. We're actually organizing some focus groups around housing need and also around the development community as we think about inclusionary zoning. If you're interested in that, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll also keep you informed through email. Promise not to bother you too much, but we do want to keep you in the loop. So I just want to, plug that if you're interested in weighing in more, you may want to participate in an upcoming focus group, which we're planning to organize in the new year. There will also be ongoing ways to offer your input online. And with that said, we hope that you will share the recording of this meeting with your friends and neighbors, because we really want to get the word out, get more input from folks in town. So you can go a long way by just letting people know about this planning process, referring them to the recording of this meeting. We're going to have that posted on the town's social media outlets. We're also going to broadcast it on Ashland's public access television station. And then we'll have a link to the polls that you all were using tonight to continue to get more input on this. And if you do have any questions, the best folks to talk to are Peter and Emma, who are doing a great job as staff for the town. And you can also send me an email if there's anything that you have questions about. This presentation will also be available on the town's website, so stay tuned for that. And again, we plan to keep in touch with you by email. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for coming out tonight, for your participation, and for giving us a strong start to this planning process. Please continue to help spread the word and stick with us as we move through this process. And I also want to say a happy holidays for everyone. Thank you for making the time to join us and during this holiday season. And we hope that you'll have a tremendous new year, and we'll have a great time in 2021, moving past this very difficult year. I think it's exciting. So we'll look forward to seeing you in 2021. Please stay in touch.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all for all your efforts.
Thank you.